The violent crack of thunder startled Amelia Parker awake, her heart pounding as rain pelted against the bedroom window of her small homestead just outside Kingston, Colorado. The late September storm of 1882 had unleashed its fury with unexpected force, and as she lit the oil lamp beside her bed, a terrible ripping sound from above made her blood run cold. Before she could react, the ceiling groaned and a portion of the roof tore away, exposing her bedroom to the merciless elements. "No, please, not now," Amelia whispered, clutching the quilt around her trembling shoulders as rain poured through the gaping hole. The widow of just 8 months stood frozen, watching helplessly as water began soaking her bedding, the dresser, and the floor. Thomas had always handled these emergencies, but Thomas was gone, taken by pneumonia last winter, leaving her alone with their farm and a heart full of grief. With shaking hands, she gathered what she could salvage, dragging the trunk containing her most precious possessions into the kitchen, which remained mercifully dry. As thunder continued to roll across the valley, Amelia huddled by the cold hearth and wept. At 26, she had built a life with Thomas over 5 years of marriage, and now everything was slipping away, first her husband, and now her home. Morning arrived with unfeeling brightness, the storm having spent its wrath during the night. Amelia stepped outside, her eyes red-rimmed from tears and lack of sleep, to survey the damage. The roof over the bedroom and part of the sitting room had been partially torn away, leaving her home exposed to the elements. She'd managed through the winter by herself, maintained the small vegetable garden, even learned to repair the chicken coop, but this was beyond her abilities. "Lord above," she whispered, pushing a strand of auburn hair from her face. "What am I to do now?" Kingston sat 3 miles down the dirt road, a growing but still modest town that had sprouted up during the silver boom. Thomas had chosen this plot of land for its fertile soil and distance from town, close enough for necessities, but far enough to build a peaceful life. Now that distance felt like an insurmountable gulf. Amelia was gathering what tools she could find in the barn when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn. A tall figure on horseback approached, the morning sun at his back casting his features in shadow until he drew closer. "Madam," the rider called out, tipping his hat as he reined his chestnut stallion to a stop. "Looks like you've had some trouble." His voice was deep and tinged with a southern drawl. Amelia straightened her back and brushed her hands against her skirt, conscious of her disheveled appearance. "The storm took part of my roof last night," she replied, studying the stranger. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years under the open sky. Dark hair curled from beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and his eyes, startlingly blue against his weathered face, assessed the damage to her home with a practiced gaze. "Quincy McAllister," he introduced himself, dismounting with fluid grace. "I've been working at the Wilcox Ranch about 5 miles west, was headed into Kingston when I saw your roof." He gestured toward the house. "That's going to need fixing before the next rain." "I'm aware," Amelia said, more sharply than intended. The stress of the night had frayed her nerves. She softened her tone. "I'm Amelia Parker, my husband. He passed last winter. I've been managing on my own." Something in Quincy's expression changed, not pity, which she had grown to resent from townsfolk, but understanding. "My condolences, Mrs. Parker. Mind if I take a closer look at that damage?" Before she could answer, he was already striding toward the house, his spurs jingling softly with each step. Amelia hurried after him, uncertain whether to be grateful for his interest or wary of his presumption. Quincy circled the house, examining the torn shingles and exposed beams. He climbed onto the porch and peered up at the jagged edge where roof met sky. "Storm took it clean off," he muttered. "Wood's still good though, structure's sound. Can it be fixed?" Amelia asked, hope creeping into her voice despite her reservations. Quincy turned to her, the morning sun illuminating his face fully. She noticed a scar that ran along his jaw, partially hidden by stubble. "Yes, madam, it can. Would take me maybe 3 days if I had the materials." I don't have much money," Amelia admitted, pride making the words difficult. Thomas had left her with some savings, but she'd been carefully rationing them, unsure how long they needed to last. Quincy studied her for a long moment, then looked back at the house. "Tell you what, I finished my work at Wilcox's yesterday, was heading to town to look for the next job." He gestured to the damaged roof. I can fix this for you. You provide the materials, meals while I work, and we'll call it square. Amelia's eyes widened. That hardly seems fair to you, Mr. McAllister. A smile touched his lips, transforming his serious face. Well, Mrs. Parker, I need somewhere to be for a few days anyway, and it's just Quincy. He extended his hand. Do we have a deal? After a moment's hesitation, Amelia took his calloused hand. We have a deal, Quincy. They rode into Kingston together later that morning, Amelia perched somewhat uncomfortably on her late husband's gelding. She hadn't ridden since Thomas fell ill, and the familiar motion brought back memories both sweet and painful. Quincy rode beside her, occasionally pointing out wildlife or commenting on the weather, but mostly allowing her the silence she needed. Kingston had grown considerably in the 5 years since Amelia had arrived as a new bride. The main street now boasted a proper hotel, 2 saloons, a bank, and several shops. Jernigan's general store remained the heart of the town, where gossip flowed as freely as the coffee from Mrs. Jernigan's ever-present pot. Amelia Parker, as I live and breathe. Harold Jernigan called out as they entered the store. His bushy white eyebrows rose at the sight of Quincy following behind her. What brings you to town today? The storm took part of my roof last night, Harold, Amelia explained, removing her gloves. I need materials to repair it. Terrible business, that storm, Harold nodded sympathetically. Took down the church steeple too, Reverend Wilson's beside himself. His curious gaze shifted to Quincy. And who might this be? Quincy McAllister, Quincy introduced himself, shaking the older man's hand. Passing through. Offered to help Mrs. Parker with her roof. Harold's expression was unreadable for a moment before breaking into a smile. Well now, that's mighty neighborly of you, Mr. McAllister. Amelia's been managing that place all on her own since Thomas passed. Good to see someone lending a hand. While the men discussed lumber and nails, Amelia felt eyes upon her and turned to find Martha Jernigan watching from behind the counter, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. Amelia had known Martha since arriving in Kingston, and the older woman had been a source of comfort after Thomas's death. Bringing strange men home now, are we? Martha asked in a low voice when Amelia approached. He offered to help with the roof, Martha, nothing more. Martha's eyes, sharp despite her 60 years, assessed Quincy from across the store. Handsome one, isn't he? Got that look about him, though. What look? Like he's running from something. Martha patted Amelia's hand. Just be careful, dear. A widow alone is vulnerable in more ways than one. Amelia pulled her hand away gently. I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions. Martha's expression softened. Of course you are. It's just been a while since I've seen you with anyone but old Harold and myself. It's good to see you out and about. By the time they'd finished at the store, Quincy had arranged for lumber and other supplies to be delivered to Amelia's homestead the following morning. They stopped at the small cafe for a quick meal before heading back, and Amelia couldn't help but notice the curious glances from townsfolk who recognized her. They're staring, she murmured over her bowl of stew. Quincy didn't look up from his plate. Small towns, people notice things. They think it's improper, a widow alone with a stranger. At this, he did look up, his blue eyes meeting hers directly. Does that bother you? Amelia considered the question. A year ago, it would have mortified her, but grief had a way of shifting priorities. I need my roof fixed more than I need their approval, she finally said. Quincy's mouth quirked in a half-smile. Smart woman. The ride back was mostly silent, both lost in their thoughts as the afternoon sun warmed their backs. When they arrived at the homestead, Quincy immediately set to work assessing what could be salvaged from the damaged roof while Amelia tended to her neglected chores. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Amelia called Quincy in for supper. She'd prepared a simple meal of salt pork, beans, and cornbread, humble fare, but the best she could offer. This is fine cooking, Mrs. Parker, Quincy said after his first bite. Please call me Amelia. She watched him eat with undisguised appetite. Have you been working cattle long? Quincy nodded, swallowing before speaking. Most of my life, grew up on a ranch in Texas, learned the trade from my father, been moving around the territories the last few years. No place to call home? Amelia asked, then regretted the personal question. I'm sorry, that's none of my business. No offense taken. Quincy broke off a piece of cornbread. Home's a complicated notion for some of us. I had one once. Hasn't felt right trying to make another. There was a story there Amelia sensed but didn't press. They ate in companionable silence until Quincy spoke again. Your husband. He built this place, Amelia nodded. Thomas was a carpenter by trade. We came out from Pennsylvania after we married. He built everything himself, the house, the barn, even most of the furniture. He did good work, Quincy observed, glancing around the kitchen. Solid craftsmanship. Pride warmed Amelia's heart. Yes, he did. Thomas believed in building things to last. Her voice caught slightly. He would be devastated to see the roof now. Well, we'll fix it, Quincy said with simple certainty. Make it as good as new. After supper, Amelia showed Quincy to the barn where he could sleep. She'd prepared a pallet of clean straw and blankets, apologizing for not having proper guest accommodations. I've slept under the stars more nights than I can count, Quincy assured her. This is downright luxurious by comparison. As Amelia walked back to the house in the gathering darkness, she paused to look up at the stars visible through her damaged roof. For the first time since the storm, she felt a tentative sense of hope. With Quincy's help, perhaps she could keep her home after all. The lumber arrived early the next morning, along with shingles, nails, and other supplies. Quincy was already up and working, having cleared away damaged sections of the roof. He worked with efficiency and purpose, his movements economical and practiced despite carpentry not being his primary trade. Amelia brought him coffee mid-morning, shielding her eyes against the sun as she looked up at him on the roof. Is it as bad as you thought? Quincy took the offered cup with a nod of thanks. No, madam, frame solid, just need to replace some rafters and the sheathing, then get new shingles on. He took a long drink of the coffee. Should have you weather tight before the next rain. Throughout the day, Amelia found herself watching him work when her own chores permitted. There was something hypnotic about the rhythm of his movements, the swing of the hammer, the careful placement of each board. By sunset, he had replaced the damaged rafters and begun work on the sheathing. Over the next 2 days, a pattern emerged. They would share breakfast at dawn, then Quincy would work on the roof while Amelia tended to her daily tasks feeding the chickens, working in the garden, preparing meals. Sometimes they would talk during these meals, sharing fragments of their lives. Amelia learned that Quincy was 32, had fought briefly for the Confederacy as a very young man before deserting. A choice I don't regret, he said firmly, and had 3 brothers scattered across the West whom he hadn't seen in years. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her courtship with Thomas, and their dreams of building a prosperous farm. You still want that? Quincy asked on the 3rd evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The farm, I mean. Amelia considered the question, rolling the cool glass of water between her palms. I don't know anymore. It was Thomas's dream first. I adopted it as my own. She looked out at the fields, partially planted but nowhere near what Thomas had envisioned. Some days I think I should sell and move back east to my sister. Other days I can't bear the thought of leaving what we built. Quincy was silent for a long moment. Land's a hard mistress, but a fair one, gives back what you put in eventually. He glanced at her. You've kept this place going on your own. That's no small thing. His words warmed something in Amelia that had been cold for months, not just the praise, but the understanding behind it. Thank you, she said softly. The roof was completed by the end of the 3rd day, just as Quincy had promised. He put the final shingles in place as the sun was setting, then climbed down the ladder with a satisfied expression. That should hold through anything short of a tornado, he declared, wiping sweat from his brow. Want to inspect my work? Together they walked through the house, and Amelia felt a weight lift from her shoulders as she looked up at the solid new ceiling. No gaps, no leaks, her home was whole again. It's perfect, she said, turning to Quincy with genuine gratitude. I don't know how to thank you properly. No need, he replied, but there was something in his expression, a reluctance, perhaps, that caught her attention. You're leaving tomorrow, she stated, recognizing the signs of a man preparing to move on. Quincy nodded. Thought I'd head north, heard there's work in Wyoming this time of year. Amelia felt an unexpected pang at the thought of his departure. In just a few days, his presence had filled a void in the homestead, not just with the physical labor, but with conversation, companionship, the simple comfort of another human presence. "At least stay for a proper breakfast before you go," she offered. "I'd like that," he said with a smile that reached his eyes. That night, Amelia lay awake in her bedroom, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling. The new roof was silent and sturdy above her, no creaks or whispers of wind finding its way through cracks. She thought of Quincy sleeping in the barn, likely already half-packed to leave at first light. It surprised her how quickly she'd grown accustomed to having him around, how empty the place would feel tomorrow. Since Thomas's death, she'd wrapped herself in solitude like a protective cloak. Now, for the first time, she felt its weight and wondered if she'd been using grief as a shield against life itself. Morning came with a hint of autumn crispness in the air. Amelia rose early, determined to prepare a farewell breakfast worthy of Quincy's generosity. She had just pulled fresh biscuits from the oven when she heard a commotion outside, shouting voices, the nervous whinnying of horses. Wiping her hands on her apron, she hurried to the door and stepped onto the porch. What she saw made her heart stutter. 3 men on horseback had surrounded Quincy in the yard. One had a pistol drawn. "Thought you could hide out here, McAllister?" the armed man called out. He was heavyset with a drooping mustache and cold eyes. "Long way from Dodge City, ain't you?" Quincy stood with his hands slightly raised, his posture tense but controlled. "I'm not hiding, Blackburn, just passing through." "Passing through with a widow woman," another rider sneered, eyeing Amelia on the porch. "How convenient." Amelia stepped forward, anger overtaking fear. "What is the meaning of this? You're trespassing on my property." The leader, Blackburn, touched his hat with mock politeness. "Beg pardon, madam, we don't mean to disturb you. We're just here for McAllister. He's wanted for questioning about a matter in Kansas." "What matter?" Amelia demanded, moving to stand beside Quincy. Blackburn's eyes narrowed. "That's between him and the law, madam. Now step aside." "There's no warrant," Quincy said quietly. "They're not lawmen, Amelia. They're hired guns working for the Barlow Ranch. This is about a land dispute, not any crime." "You shot Jake Barlow's brother," the third man accused. "After he tried to burn out a family that wouldn't sell their water rights," Quincy countered, his voice steady. "The law in Dodge City cleared me of any wrongdoing, self-defense." Blackburn spat on the ground. "Barlow don't see it that way. He's offering $500 for you, McAllister, dead or alive, though I reckon he'd prefer dead." Amelia's mind raced. 3 armed men against Quincy, whose gun was likely still in the barn with his belongings. The odds were impossible. "Mr. Blackburn," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "I don't know what happened in Kansas, but this is Colorado territory. If you have a legitimate complaint against Mr. McAllister, take it to Sheriff Davis in Kingston." Blackburn laughed. "Lady, you don't understand how these things work out here." "I understand that you're threatening a man on my property," Amelia replied, her voice growing stronger. "A man who's done nothing but help me when I needed it. I also understand that my late husband kept a shotgun just inside that door, and I'm not afraid to use it." Tension crackled in the air as Blackburn assessed her resolve. After a long moment, he holstered his pistol with deliberate slowness. "This ain't over, McAllister. We'll be watching the roads." "You do that," Quincy replied evenly. The 3 riders backed their horses away, then turned and galloped down the road toward town. Only when they were out of sight did Amelia realize she was trembling. "Are you all right?" Quincy asked, turning to her with concern. "Am I all right?" Amelia gave a shaky laugh. "Those men were going to shoot you on my doorstep. They might have tried," Quincy conceded. "Thank you for stepping in, though it was a risk you shouldn't have taken." Amelia studied his face, seeing it anew. "You weren't planning to leave today at all, were you?" "You knew they were coming," Quincy sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I saw them in town when we were getting supplies. Hoped they hadn't recognized me, but I couldn't be sure. I was going to leave at first light to draw them away from here." His eyes met hers apologetically. "I didn't want to bring trouble to your door." "You should have told me," Amelia said, hurt by the deception. "And say what? That I'm a man with enemies, that helping you might put you in danger." Quincy shook his head. "I thought I could slip away before they showed up." Amelia turned back toward the house. "The biscuits are getting cold. Come inside and you can tell me exactly what happened in Kansas while we eat." Over breakfast, Quincy explained. He'd been working for a small rancher in Kansas. who was being pressured to sell his water rights to the powerful Barlow family. When threats escalated to violence, Quincy had defended the rancher's property from arsonists, wounding Barlow's brother in the process. Though the local sheriff had ruled it self-defense, the Barlows were not the type to accept legal judgments that didn't go their way. "So now they've sent men after you," Amelia concluded, pouring more coffee. "Wouldn't be the first time someone's held a grudge," Quincy said with a weariness that suggested a lifetime of similar confrontations. "But I need to move on. They know I'm here now and they'll be watching." Amelia considered their options, surprised at her own reluctance to see him leave. "What if you didn't run? Sheriff Davis is a good man. If we explain the situation, Blackburn and his kind don't care about local sheriffs," Quincy interrupted gently. "They'll wait until they catch me alone, and that will be that." "Then don't be alone," Amelia said, the idea forming as she spoke. "Stay here. Work the farm with me through the harvest at least. They won't try anything if there are witnesses around." Quincy stared at her in disbelief. "Amelia, you don't know what you're saying. These men are dangerous." "So is trying to run a farm alone with winter coming," she countered. "I'm offering you fair work for fair pay, and Kingston is a law-abiding town. If those men cause trouble, they'll find themselves unwelcome very quickly." "It's not that simple. It can be," Amelia insisted, surprised by her own boldness. "Unless you have pressing business elsewhere." Quincy's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, concern, and something else she couldn't quite name. "No," he finally said. "Nothing pressing." "Then it's settled. You'll stay through the harvest. By then, this Barlow business might have blown over." They both knew it wasn't likely, but Quincy nodded slowly. "All right, through the harvest, but we take precautions, and if there's any sign of trouble, I go. Deal?" Amelia extended her hand across the table. "Deal." The days that followed took on a new rhythm. Quincy moved his few possessions into the small storage room off the kitchen, which Amelia hastily converted into simple sleeping quarters. Together, they established a routine of shared labor, Quincy handling the heavier farm work, while Amelia managed the household and garden. Amelia visited Kingston twice that week, first to speak with Sheriff Davis about the men who had threatened Quincy, then to arrange the sale of some of her preserved goods at the general store. Each time, she felt eyes following her, but saw no sign of Blackburn or his companions. Sheriff Davis had been sympathetic but limited in what he could do. "If they show up causing trouble in my town, I'll deal with them," he promised. "But I can't arrest men for making threats outside my jurisdiction." "Best advice is to stay alert and maybe consider having McAllister move along once harvest is done." Martha Jernigan was more direct during Amelia's visit to the store. "People are talking, dear," she said as she counted out payment for Amelia's preserves. "A young widow with a strange man living under her roof. It's raising eyebrows." "He's a hired hand, Martha, nothing more." Martha's knowing look suggested she thought otherwise. "If you say so, dear, just mind your reputation. It's all a woman has in this world." Amelia left the store with a mixture of irritation and uncertainty. She'd never much cared for gossip, but being its subject was uncomfortable. Still, the practical benefits of having Quincy at the farm outweighed any social discomfort. Work that would have taken her weeks was being completed in days, and for the first time since Thomas's death, she found herself thinking of the future with something other than dread. October brought crisp mornings and golden afternoons perfect for harvesting. The small wheat field yielded better than Amelia had expected, and the vegetable garden provided a bounty that kept her busy canning and preserving. Quincy repaired fences, split firewood for winter, and helped bring in the harvest with tireless efficiency. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes in companionable silence. Amelia found herself sharing stories of her life with Thomas, memories that had been too painful to revisit alone but now brought comfort in the telling. "He sounds like a good man," Quincy said one evening after she described Thomas teaching her to dance in their tiny sitting room in Pennsylvania. "He was," Amelia agreed, her fingers working steadily at her knitting. "Kind, hardworking, devoted. I was fortunate in my marriage." She glanced up at Quincy. "And you've never mentioned a wife." A shadow crossed his face. "Never married, came close once back in Texas." What happened? Quincy stared into the fire. War happened, I went off to fight, came back different, she'd moved on. He shrugged as if dismissing the memory. Probably for the best. Amelia sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. They all had their private sorrows. As October waned, they fell into an easy partnership that surprised them both. Quincy taught Amelia to shoot more accurately with Thomas's old rifle, while she showed him how to make Thomas's favorite apple dumplings. They rode into Kingston together for supplies, ignoring the curious glances and whispers. There had been no further sign of Blackburn and his men, though neither Amelia nor Quincy believed they had given up. The threat lingered in the background of their days, a shadow they both acknowledged but tried not to let darken their growing friendship. It was a brisk morning in early November when everything changed. Amelia had risen before dawn to begin baking bread, the kitchen warm and fragrant with yeast. She heard Quincy moving about in his room, then the back door opening as he went out to begin morning chores. She was kneading dough when the gunshot cracked through the clear morning air. Amelia froze for a heartbeat, then rushed to the door, wiping her hands on her apron. Outside, she saw Quincy crouched behind the water trough, revolver in hand. In the distance, near the tree line, a figure on horseback retreated at speed. "Quincy," she called out, starting toward him. "Stay inside," he shouted back, his eyes never leaving the tree line. Another shot rang out, this one splintering wood from the porch railing near Amelia's head. She ducked and scrambled back into the house. Heart pounding through the window, she watched as Quincy fired twice toward the trees, then made a dash for the barn. Minutes stretched like hours as she waited, clutching Thomas's shotgun, uncertain what was happening outside her home. Finally, she heard hoofbeats approaching and risked a look through the window. Quincy rode toward the house at a gallop, leading a second horse, her mare already saddled. "Amelia," he called as he reached the porch. "We need to go, now." She hesitated only a moment before grabbing her shawl and a small bag of essentials she kept prepared for emergencies. Thomas had taught her that much: always be ready to run if needed. "What happened?" she asked as she mounted the mare, awkwardly arranging her skirts. "Blackburn," Quincy replied grimly. "He was alone this time, watching the farm, took a shot when he thought I wasn't looking." His jaw tightened. "We need to get to town, there's no telling how many more are out there." They rode hard toward Kingston, taking a circuitous route through fields and wooded areas rather than using the main road. Amelia's mind raced with questions and fears. Would they have to leave the farm permanently? Would Blackburn burn it in their absence? What would become of her home, her animals, everything she and Thomas had built? The streets of Kingston were busy with morning activity when they arrived, townspeople stopping to stare at their disheveled appearance and obvious haste. Quincy led them directly to the sheriff's office, dismounting in one fluid motion and helping Amelia down. Sheriff Davis looked up from his desk as they entered, his weathered face registering surprise and then concern. "Mrs. Parker, Mr. McAllister, what brings you in with such urgency?" "We were shot at this morning," Quincy explained, removing his hat. "Blackburn's back." The sheriff's expression darkened as Quincy recounted the morning's events. When he finished, Davis stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Sounds like they're done waiting for you to leave town on your own, McAllister." "It would seem so," Quincy agreed. "We can't go back to the farm, can we?" Amelia asked. Already knowing the answer, Sheriff Davis sighed heavily. "Not right away, Mrs. Parker. These men are clearly willing to risk a lot to get to Mr. McAllister. I'll ride out there with some deputies, see if we can track Blackburn, but until then, you'd best stay in town." He glanced between them. Separately, I might add. Amelia felt her cheeks warm at the implication. "Of course." "Mrs. Jernigan has rooms above the store," the sheriff continued. "I'm sure she'd be happy to accommodate you, Mrs. Parker. As for you, McAllister, the hotel should suffice." The arrangements were made, though Amelia could tell Quincy was unhappy with the separation. "I don't like leaving you unprotected," he murmured as they walked toward the general store. "I'll be fine," Amelia assured him, though uncertainty gnawed at her. "Martha will look after me and the sheriff knows where to find us both." Martha Jernigan was predictably eager for details when Amelia explained the situation. Her concern for Amelia's safety mixed with poorly concealed curiosity about her relationship with Quincy. "Just a hired hand, you said," Martha reminded her as she showed Amelia to a small but comfortable room above the store. And now you're both fleeing gunmen together. Quite the development. It's not like that, Martha, Amelia protested, though she wasn't entirely sure what it was anymore. Her feelings for Quincy had evolved from gratitude to friendship to something more complex that she wasn't ready to name. If you say so, dear, Martha replied with the same knowing look she'd given weeks earlier. I'll bring up some tea and sandwiches. You look exhausted. Left alone, Amelia sat on the edge of the narrow bed and let the emotions of the morning wash over her. Fear, uncertainty, anger at being driven from her home, they swirled together in a maelstrom that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. A soft knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. Expecting Martha with the promised tea, she was startled to find Quincy standing in the hallway instead. "May I come in?" he asked, hat in hand. Amelia glanced nervously down the stairs. "Martha will have a fit if she catches you up here." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I'll risk it. This won't take long." She stepped aside to let him enter, leaving the door pointedly ajar. Quincy stood awkwardly in the center of the small room, turning his hat in his hands. "I wanted to apologize," he began. "This is my fault. I should never have stayed at your farm once I knew Blackburn was in the area. I've put you in danger, cost you your home." "Stop," Amelia interrupted. "You fixed my roof when I had nowhere else to turn. You've worked alongside me for weeks, asking little in return. You didn't bring this trouble, it followed you. There's a difference." Quincy looked unconvinced. "The result is the same. You're hiding in town instead of safe in your home. And what would you have done differently? Left me with a half-harvested farm and winter approaching." Amelia shook her head. "I made my choice when I asked you to stay, Quincy. I don't regret it." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed, deeper than either had anticipated. The moment was broken by Martha's voice from the bottom of the stairs. "Amelia, who are you talking to up there?" Quincy moved swiftly to the door. "I should go. Sheriff Davis is organizing a group to ride out to your farm this afternoon. I volunteered to go along." "Be careful," Amelia said, resisting the unexpected urge to reach for his hand. "Always am," he replied with a wink that belied the seriousness of the situation. After he departed, narrowly avoiding Martha on the stairs, Amelia stood at the window overlooking Kingston's main street. Below, life continued its normal rhythm, shoppers carrying parcels, children playing, men gathering outside the saloon. None of them knew that her world had been upended twice in as many months, first by a storm that took her roof, then by men intent on harming the person who had fixed it. Sheriff Davis and his posse, including Quincy, rode out to the Parker farm that afternoon. They returned at dusk with grim faces and no sign of Blackburn or his companions. The farm had been undisturbed, the animals unharmed, but tracks suggested at least 3 riders had been watching the property from the tree line. "They're still out there," Sheriff Davis reported to Amelia and Quincy, who had gathered in his office for the update. "Waiting for you to return, most likely. Or planning something worse," Quincy added darkly. The sheriff nodded reluctantly. "That's a possibility we can't ignore. I've sent telegrams to lawmen in neighboring counties and to the territorial authorities in Denver. If these men are wanted elsewhere, we might have cause to arrest them on site. And if they're not," Amelia asked, "then we're limited in what we can do until they actually commit a crime in my jurisdiction," Davis admitted. "I can post deputies at your farm for a few days, Mrs. Parker, but not indefinitely. So we wait," Quincy concluded, frustration evident in his voice. "For now," the sheriff agreed. "Both of you stay in town where there are witnesses and my deputies can keep an eye out. We'll figure out the next step once we know more about these men." The waiting was the hardest part. Amelia spent her days helping Martha in the store, her nights tossing restlessly in the unfamiliar bed above it. Quincy took odd jobs around Kingston, always within sight of the sheriff's office, his vigilance never wavering. They saw each other daily, but rarely had opportunities to speak privately. Martha's watchful eye and the sheriff's admonition to maintain propriety kept them at a respectable distance in public. Yet Amelia found her thoughts increasingly occupied by Quincy, his quiet strength, his unwavering protectiveness, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. On the fourth day of their exile in Kingston, Sheriff Davis received a reply to one of his telegrams. He called Amelia and Quincy to his office immediately. "Got word from Dodge City," he announced without preamble. "Blackburn and his companions are indeed wanted men, not just for harassing you, McAllister, but for a string of assaults and one suspected murder across Kansas." He handed the telegram to Quincy. "They're offering a substantial reward for information leading to their capture." Hope flared in Amelia's chest. "So you can arrest them now, if we can find them," the sheriff qualified. "No one's seen hide nor hair of them in town, and your farm's been quiet according to my deputies." "They're planning something," Quincy said, his expression grim. "Men like Blackburn don't just give up and move on, especially with money involved." Sheriff Davis nodded grimly. "I agree. Which is why I'm doubling the watch on both of you and the farm." That night, a fierce autumn storm blew through Kingston, reminiscent of the one that had taken Amelia's roof over a month earlier. Wind howled through the streets, driving rain against windows and sending loose items tumbling down the boardwalks. Amelia stood at her window, watching the deserted street below, thinking of her farm and whether the new roof was holding against the elements. A movement caught her eye, a figure hurrying through the rain, head bent against the wind. Even through the downpour, she recognized Quincy's broad-shouldered silhouette. He was headed toward the general store, toward her. Moments later, Martha's voice called up the stairs. "Amelia." "Mr. McAllister is here to see you, says it's urgent." Amelia hurried downstairs, her heart pounding with apprehension. Quincy stood dripping in the store's entrance, his expression tight with tension. "What's happened?" she demanded. "They've been spotted," he said without preamble. "Blackburn and at least 5 others riding toward your farm from the north. Sheriff Davis is gathering men, but the storm's slowing everything down." Amelia's blood ran cold. "They're going to burn it," she whispered. It was what men like Blackburn did if they couldn't get their target directly. They destroyed what he valued. And they had seen her and Quincy together enough to know that harming her home would hurt them both. "I'm not going to let that happen," Quincy promised, his blue eyes fierce with determination. "The sheriff's gathering a posse, but I'm heading out now. I won't ask you to come, it's my home," Amelia interrupted. "Of course I'm coming." Martha protested vehemently, but Amelia was resolute. Within minutes, she had changed into her sturdiest dress and boots, wrapped herself in oilskin against the rain, and joined Quincy outside where he waited with their horses. The ride to the farm was harrowing. Rain lashed at them mercilessly, the wind threatening to unseat them with each powerful gust. The normally 30-minute journey stretched to nearly an hour as they navigated muddy roads and swollen creek crossings. As they approached the final bend before the farm would come into view, Quincy reined his horse to a stop and motioned for Amelia to do the same. They dismounted and led their horses into a dense copse of trees that provided some shelter from the storm. "We need to be careful," Quincy whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind and rain. "If they're already there, riding straight in would be suicide." Amelia nodded, cold fear mixing with determination in her veins. "What's the plan?" "I'll approach from the north through the trees." "You stay with the horses until no," Amelia interrupted firmly. "I'm not staying behind, it's my home, Quincy." Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Quincy nodded, his expression a mixture of respect and concern. "All right, but we stay together and you follow my lead. These men won't hesitate to shoot a woman if she gets in their way." They secured the horses and moved carefully through the woods that bordered the northern edge of Amelia's property. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, but the wind still whipped through the trees, covering the sounds of their approach. When they reached the edge of the clearing, Amelia's heart sank. 6 horses were tethered near her barn, and light flickered through the windows of her house. Blackburn and his men had already arrived. "They're inside," Quincy murmured, his hand resting on his revolver, "probably waiting out the worst of the storm before they burn the place." "What do we do?" Amelia whispered, fighting back panic. Quincy studied the scene, his expression calculating. "The sheriff and his men should be less than an hour behind us, if we can keep Blackburn occupied until they arrive." "How do we do that without getting ourselves killed?" A grim smile touched Quincy's lips. "I have an idea, but you're not going to like it." He was right, she didn't. Quincy's plan involved him presenting himself as a deliberate distraction, while Amelia circled around to the back of the house to prevent any escape in that direction. It was dangerous, potentially suicidal, but they had limited options and time was running out. "Promise me you'll stay hidden," Quincy insisted as they prepared to separate. "Just make enough noise to confuse them if they try to run out the back. The sheriff will be here soon." "Be careful," Amelia said, gripping his arm. The words seemed woefully inadequate for the fear churning inside her. Quincy covered her hand with his own. "I didn't fix your roof just to let these men burn it down," he said with forced lightness. Then, more seriously, "if anything happens to me, ride for town. Don't try to be a hero." Before she could respond, he squeezed her hand once and was gone, melting into the rainy darkness with a stealth that spoke of years of experience in dangerous situations. Amelia circled around to the back of the house, Thomas's shotgun clutched in her trembling hands. She positioned herself behind the woodpile, where she had a clear view of the back door but remained hidden from anyone looking out the windows. Minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. The only sounds were the diminishing patter of rain and the occasional gust of wind. Then suddenly, Quincy's voice rang out from the front of the house. "Blackburn, I know you're in there. I'm the one you want. Come out and face me." Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs as she imagined Quincy standing exposed in her front yard, deliberately drawing fire from 6 armed men. She heard shouts from inside the house, the scrape of chairs being pushed back, boots on floorboards. The front door burst open and more shouting ensued, though Amelia couldn't make out the words over the wind. Then the crack of gunfire, one shot, then several in rapid succession. Every instinct screamed at her to run to the front, to see if Quincy was alive, but she forced herself to remain in position. If Blackburn's men tried to flee through the back, she needed to be ready. More gunshots, a scream of pain, then an eerie silence broken only by the moaning wind. The back door suddenly flew open, and a figure burst out, pistol in hand. In the dim light, Amelia recognized one of the men who had accompanied Blackburn to her farm that first day. He was scanning the yard, preparing to make a run for it. Amelia stepped out from behind the woodpile, shotgun raised. "Don't move," she commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The man whirled, raising his pistol instinctively. Amelia fired without hesitation. The shotguns roared deafening in the confined space of the yard. The man crumpled, clutching his leg where the buckshot had torn through it. More gunfire erupted from the front of the house, and Amelia's fear for Quincy overrode her caution. Keeping the wounded man covered with the shotgun, she edged toward the corner of the house, desperate for a glimpse of what was happening. What she saw froze her blood. Quincy was pinned down behind the water trough, exchanging fire with Blackburn and another man who had taken positions on either side of the front door. 2 bodies already lay motionless in the muddy yard. As she watched, Blackburn moved to get a clearer shot at Quincy, not realizing Amelia could see him from her position. Without conscious thought, she raised the shotgun and fired her second barrel. Blackburn staggered as the buckshot peppered his side, dropping his pistol and falling to one knee. The distraction was all Quincy needed. He rose and fired twice, hitting Blackburn in the chest and the remaining gunman in the shoulder. In the sudden silence that followed, Amelia and Quincy stared at each other across the yard, both breathing heavily, both struggling to believe they were still alive. "Are you hurt?" he called, already moving toward her. Amelia shook her head, unable to form words past the constriction in her throat. She gestured toward the man she'd shot, who was still conscious but incapacitated. Quincy quickly secured the wounded man, then turned to Amelia, his eyes scanning her for injuries despite her assurance that she was unharmed. He reached out as if to touch her face, then hesitated, his hand falling back to his side. "You saved my life," he said simply. "We saved each other," Amelia corrected, her voice finally returning. The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Sheriff Davis and his deputies rode into the yard, weapons drawn, taking in the scene with professional assessment. "Looks like you two handled things without us," the sheriff observed dryly as he dismounted. "Anyone still alive among them?" "3 wounded, Quincy reported. 3 dead, Blackburn's among the dead." The aftermath was a blur of activity. Deputies tended to the wounded, collected the dead, took statements from Amelia and Quincy. The sheriff was both impressed by their actions and exasperated by the risks they had taken. "Next time, wait for the law," he admonished, though there was grudging respect in his tone. By dawn, the bodies and prisoners had been transported to Kingston, and the Parker farm was quiet once more. Amelia stood on her porch, watching the sunrise paint the eastern sky in delicate pinks and golds. Despite the violence that had occurred hours earlier, the land looked peaceful, washed clean by the storm. Quincy joined her, 2 steaming cups of coffee in his hands. He offered one to Amelia, who accepted it gratefully. "How are you holding up?" he asked, studying her face. "I'm not sure," Amelia admitted. "It doesn't seem quite real yet." They sipped their coffee in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Quincy spoke. "I'll be leaving tomorrow," he said quietly. "With Blackburn gone, there's no reason for me to bring any more trouble to your door." Amelia felt a sharp pang at his words, though she had been expecting them. Quincy was a drifter by nature, a man who never stayed in one place for long. She had known this from the beginning. "Where will you go?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. "Wyoming, probably. Work steady there this time of year." He hesitated, then added, "Unless there's a reason to stay." The question hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Amelia set down her coffee cup and turned to face him fully. "These past weeks, having you here, it's the first time since Thomas died that I felt like I could breathe again, like there might be a future worth looking toward." She took a deep breath. "I don't want you to go, Quincy." His expression softened, hope kindling in his blue eyes. "You're sure?" "I'm not Thomas. I don't have his skills, his steadiness." "I don't want you to be Thomas," Amelia said simply. "I want you to be you, the man who fixed my roof when I thought all was lost, the man who stood with me against danger rather than running from it." Quincy set his own cup down and took a step closer to her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I've never been much for putting down roots," he said softly. "But these past weeks, working this land with you, it's felt right in a way nothing has for a long time." "Then stay," Amelia whispered. "Not just through the winter, stay and build something with me." Quincy's hand came up to gently cup her cheek, his touch so tender it nearly undid her composure. "I'd like that more than anything," he murmured before lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that promised new beginnings. Winter came early that year, the first heavy snow falling in late November. But the Parker farm, now the Parker McAllister farm, following a simple ceremony performed by Reverend Wilson in early December, was well prepared. The roof held strong against snow and wind, the barn was filled with hay, the root cellar stocked with preserved fruits and vegetables. On Christmas Eve, Amelia and Quincy sat before the fire in their snug sitting room. Outside, snow fell in gentle flakes, blanketing the world in hushed white. Inside, warmth and contentment filled every corner. "Do you ever miss it?" Amelia asked, her head resting comfortably against Quincy's shoulder. "The open road, the freedom to go wherever the wind takes you," Quincy considered the question, his fingers absently stroking her hair. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," he admitted. "Fewer responsibilities, fewer ties." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "But I've never been happier than I am right here, with roots and responsibilities and you." Amelia smiled, placing a hand over his where it rested protectively on her slightly rounded belly. Their child would be born in the spring, a new life to match their new beginning. "Who would have thought," she mused, "that losing my roof would lead to finding my heart again?" Quincy's laugh was warm against her hair. "I'm just glad I happened to be riding by that day." "I don't believe in coincidence," Amelia said softly. "I believe you were meant to find me and I was meant to find you." Outside, the wind picked up, whistling around the eaves of their sturdy home. But inside, all was still and perfect. A haven built by 4 hands and 2 hearts that had found in each other what they'd never known. They were seeking not just shelter from the storm, but a place to truly belong. As spring blossomed across the Colorado landscape, bringing wildflowers and birdsong to the Parker McAllister farm, Amelia gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named James Thomas McAllister. Quincy proved to be a natural father, doting on his son with a gentleness that continually surprised and moved Amelia. The farm prospered under their joint care, expanding to include more livestock and fields. Quincy's knowledge of cattle complemented Amelia's gardening skills, and together they built something neither could have managed alone. Kingston grew as well, the railroad finally reaching it in 1885, bringing new opportunities and connections to the wider world. Amelia and Quincy became respected members of the community, their dramatic story of facing down hired guns evolving into local legend, embellished with each telling at the general store or saloon. Quincy's past occasionally reached out to touch them old acquaintances passing through. The rare letter from one of his brothers, but the ghosts that had driven him from place to place seemed finally laid to rest. He had found his home, not in a location, but in the family he and Amelia created together. In 1889, 7 years after a storm tore away Amelia's roof and brought Quincy into her life, they welcomed a daughter, Eliza Martha McAllister. James, by then a spirited 7-year-old with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined nature, took his role as big brother with solemn responsibility. Life was not without challenges: droughts, harsh winters, the economic uncertainties that plagued farmers everywhere, but they faced each difficulty together, their bond only strengthening with each obstacle overcome. On cool evenings, they would often sit on their porch, watching the sun set over the land they both loved, their children playing nearby. Sometimes they spoke of the future, of their hopes for James and Eliza, of improvements to the farm. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, no words needed between two people who had found in each other not just love, but true partnership. And sometimes, when the wind blew just so, they would share a smile, remembering a storm-tossed night when a widow lost her roof and a wandering cowboy found his home.